The shelves aren't empty yet, but the foods that could actually keep you alive are already disappearing. Right now, tensions between two of the world's most volatile military powers are climbing again. Movements on the ground, countermoves in the air, statements that remind anyone paying attention of exactly how quickly the world can shift beneath your feet. History doesn't wait for you to feel ready. Here's what most people miss. Major disruptions don't begin with collapse. They begin with instability, slow instability, the kind that creeps in quietly before it arrives loudly. Supply chains begin to stretch, energy prices edge upward, transportation becomes inconsistent, and day by day, the world you knew starts to feel a little less certain. Shelves don't go bare overnight. Choices narrow first, then quality drops, then availability. The food is still there, for a while, but the food that actually helps you endure, that food has a different set of rules. Because in a prolonged crisis, the real problem isn't whether you ate today. The real problem is whether what you have will still serve you in 3 months, 6 months, or a year from now. History is clear on this. People don't collapse from sudden starvation. They collapse because what they stored either spoils, runs out, or fails to give the body what it actually needs over extended time. Calories are not enough. Shelf life is not enough. What you need is the right combination of longevity, nutritional depth, and practical usability when conditions are no longer comfortable. So this isn't a list of trendy survival foods. This is a list of 12 foods that hold their value when the systems around them stop holding theirs. 12 foods tested not by marketing campaigns, but by human history itself. Let's begin. Number 12. Potato flakes. Some foods make it onto a survival list because they're hard to find. Potato flakes make it onto this list because they're easy to overlook, and that's exactly the mistake that costs people during a crisis. Think about what actually gets complicated when infrastructure breaks down. It's not just the food supply, it's the fuel supply. When gas becomes rationed, when electricity is unreliable, when firewood runs low, cooking becomes a calculation. Every meal that requires an hour of heat is a meal that costs you something you might not be able to spare. A pot of beans takes hours. A thick stew demands sustained, steady heat. What seems like a minor inconvenience in a normal week becomes a genuine burden when resources are tight. Potato flakes eliminate that calculation almost entirely. Just add hot water. That's the whole process. Within minutes, you have a calorie-dense source of energy that your body can use immediately. No open flame required for extended periods. No planning around fuel availability. No waiting. The reason they last is structural. During processing, nearly all moisture is stripped away. Without moisture, microorganisms have nothing to work with. Unlike many shelf-stable foods that contain oils or fats that will eventually turn rancid, potato flakes are stripped down to the essentials. In a dry, airtight environment kept away from temperature swings, they hold their value for a remarkably long time, far longer than anything fresh in your kitchen will. The mistake most people make isn't buying them, it's storing them incorrectly. The moment a package is opened and exposed to even trace amounts of humidity, the countdown begins. Humidity is the enemy. Seal them properly. Store them in a stable, dry location. Do that, and time becomes almost irrelevant. When your body is running on low reserves, when mental clarity has already started to dull and standing at a stove for 40 minutes sounds impossible, you don't need gourmet. You need something that delivers energy fast with the least amount of effort. That's what potato flakes provide. Sometimes in a crisis, what keeps you moving isn't the best meal you could have. It's the meal that appears exactly when your body is about to stop. Number 11. Iodized salt. Nearly every list mentions salt, but most people miss the part that matters most. It's not just whether you have salt, it's what kind of salt you have. Plain salt is virtually indestructible. It doesn't expire in any meaningful way. It doesn't require refrigeration, electricity, or regular resupply. These qualities alone make it valuable during extended instability. But iodized salt carries something extra that regular salt does not, a mineral that the body depends on in ways most people never consider until it's already declining. Iodine is what keeps the thyroid functioning, and the thyroid isn't just one organ among many. It regulates the pace of nearly every biological process your body runs: energy metabolism, temperature regulation, cognitive function, recovery speed. The thyroid is, in many ways, the master dial of your physical performance.
In normal conditions, iodine comes from seafood, dairy, certain vegetables. When supply chains shrink and fresh food becomes scarce, those sources disappear quietly. You may not notice the drop immediately. The body has reserves. But as weeks pass and the thyroid begins to operate at reduced capacity, things start to shift. Fatigue sets in earlier. Tolerance to cold decreases noticeably. Recovery after physical effort takes longer. Even small tasks feel heavier than they should. And the frustrating part is that none of it seems connected. It feels like general decline, not a specific deficiency. Someone once described the experience this way. They had salt in the house the whole time, but it wasn't iodized, and the difference didn't show up for weeks. By the time they recognized what was happening, the slow drain had already been going on for some time. There's also a second function that often goes unmentioned. Salt is a preservation tool. In a situation without consistent refrigeration, a small quantity of salt can be used to dry cure meat, extend the shelf life of vegetables, and slow spoilage in ways that multiply the value of everything else you have. And when the body loses water through heat, exertion, or stress, a pinch of salt dissolved into clean water helps maintain electrolyte balance, which directly affects endurance and mental sharpness. Salt doesn't expire. Kept properly, it holds its properties for decades. And in iodized form, every pinch does double duty, preserving food and supporting internal function. The question is a simple one. What kind of salt are you keeping right now? Number 10. Egg powder. Protein is one of the first casualties of a prolonged crisis, not because it becomes rare, but because fresh protein sources are fragile. Meat spoils in days without cold storage. Fresh eggs have a narrow window. Dairy products are almost entirely dependent on an intact supply chain. When electricity becomes unreliable or transportation is disrupted, these protein sources don't disappear in months, they disappear in days. The danger isn't hunger. The danger is more subtle than that. Carbohydrates might still be available. You might feel like you're eating enough, but without adequate protein, the body's ability to maintain and recover starts to degrade. Muscle strength diminishes faster. Physical endurance drops sharply. Recovery after effort takes longer and longer. You can keep going for a while, but each day you're drawing down a reserve that isn't being replenished. Egg powder changes that equation. It doesn't need refrigeration. It doesn't depend on the grid. Kept sealed and protected from moisture, it maintains its nutritional profile for an extended period, months or even years in optimal conditions. What fresh eggs provide over a week, properly stored egg powder can provide over a far longer timeline. Someone shared an account of going through a prolonged power outage with what seemed like enough food. Carbohydrates were plentiful, but as days turned into weeks without an adequate protein source, the body stopped bouncing back the way it should. Familiar tasks left lasting fatigue. The problem wasn't calories, it was the raw material the body needs to repair itself. In a crisis, protein isn't a luxury. It's what allows the body to keep recovering after each day of stress. It preserves muscle. It supports immune function. It maintains the structural integrity of tissues under pressure. And what determines whether you make it through isn't just how long you can push before breaking down. It's whether your body can rebuild overnight so you can push again the next day. Number 9. Nutritional yeast. In extended survival situations, one of the first things to decline isn't energy, it's clarity. The ability to think straight, to make sound decisions under pressure, to stay emotionally stable when everything around you is destabilizing. B vitamins are the primary reason this happens, and they're also one of the most commonly neglected elements in any serious food storage plan.
In normal life, B vitamins come from fresh vegetables, meat, eggs, and dairy. Those are exactly the foods that tend to disappear first when supply chains falter. The deficiency builds slowly. In the early stages, it's subtle. Mild difficulty concentrating, a sense that mental tasks take a little more effort than usual, slightly slower reactions, emotions that are harder to regulate. None of it dramatic enough to identify clearly as a nutritional problem. But combine prolonged B vitamin deficiency with the psychological stress of a crisis environment, and the effects become compounding. Judgment deteriorates, reaction time slows in situations where quick decisions matter. The emotional buffer that keeps you from making panicked choices starts to thin. In those conditions, the ability to think clearly isn't just about comfort, it's operational.
Nutritional yeast is dense with B vitamins, B1, B6, and B12 among them. It also provides a light but meaningful amount of protein. In dry, sealed storage away from moisture, it holds its nutritional value without refrigeration for an extended period. It can be stirred into soups, mixed into grain dishes, or added to almost any meal without dramatically altering the flavor. People who have lived through prolonged food scarcity often describe a period where they still had enough to eat, but gradually lost the mental sharpness needed to manage their situation effectively. They didn't run out of calories, they ran out of the micronutrients that support the brain. Nutritional yeast is one of the few shelf-stable ways to maintain that support over time. Number 8. Canned fish. At some point in any prolonged crisis, the body doesn't just need fuel, it needs the full complement of what keeps biology running at full capacity. And one of the hardest combinations to maintain from shelf-stable sources is protein, healthy fat, and key minerals together in a single, practical form. Canned fish delivers all three. Sardines, tuna, mackerel, salmon all provide high-quality protein, omega-3 fatty acids, vitamin D, calcium, and a range of minerals that support muscle function, immune response, and nervous system health. The omega-3 component in particular is difficult to source for most shelf-stable foods, and it plays a direct role in reducing the inflammatory response that prolonged physical and psychological stress produces. What makes canned fish especially practical is that it requires no preparation beyond opening, no cooking, no refrigeration, no added resources. In a moment when fuel conservation matters, being able to consume a nutrient-dense protein source with nothing but a can opener is a meaningful advantage. Someone who spent an extended period under restricted conditions described the moment they opened a can of sardines after days of relying purely on carbohydrates. The physical change they noticed over the next 24 hours wasn't dramatic, but it was real. The body felt more stable. The sense of depletion that had been building started to ease. That's not just perception. That's biochemistry working the way it's supposed to. And beyond nutrition, canned fish keeps. Properly sealed cans and stable storage conditions maintain both safety and nutritional value for years. They're compact, calorie efficient, and require nothing from the surrounding infrastructure to remain usable. Number 6. White rice. White rice is not the most nutritionally complex food on this list, but it is arguably the most foundational. A stable caloric base is what everything else in a survival plan builds on. Without sufficient calories, the body begins to use itself as fuel. Protein, fat, and micronutrient intake becomes largely irrelevant if you're running a sustained caloric deficit severe enough to trigger muscle catabolism. White rice solves the caloric base problem better than almost any other shelf-stable food. It is calorie-dense, nutritionally neutral enough to pair with virtually anything, and remarkably easy to cook. When stored properly in sealed, airtight containers, particularly with oxygen absorbers, white rice can remain edible and safe for consumption over extremely long time horizons. Brown rice, despite its higher nutritional profile under normal circumstances, contains natural oils that limit its shelf life significantly. White rice, stripped of those oils, is built to last. The versatility matters too. Rice combines with protein sources, fats, seasonings, dried vegetables,
canned fish, legumes. It adapts to whatever else you have. It turns small quantities of other ingredients into complete, sustaining meals. And it provides the predictable energy output that lets the body operate consistently day after day. In regions of the world where food insecurity has been an ongoing reality rather than a theoretical concern, rice has been the anchor of survival for generations. There's wisdom in that pattern. The things that have worked across centuries of genuine scarcity don't require rebranding, they require attention. Number 5. Dried lentils. If white rice is the caloric foundation, dried lentils are the structural support. They provide what rice lacks: high protein content, significant dietary fiber, and a range of minerals including iron, potassium, and folate in a form that stores with exceptional longevity. In a crisis context, protein depletion is a slow catastrophe. It doesn't announce itself the way acute hunger does. The body quietly adjusts, drawing from muscle reserves, reducing repair capacity, lowering the priority of processes that aren't immediately essential to survival. By the time the effects are obvious, the deficit has been building for weeks. Dried lentils counter this without requiring refrigeration, electricity, or complex preparation. They cook relatively quickly compared to other legumes, typically within 20 to 30 minutes, which reduces fuel expenditure compared to beans or other pulses. They absorb flavors from whatever they're cooked with, which means they adapt easily to available seasonings and remain palatable even as variety declines. Iron from lentils supports red blood cell production and oxygen transport. Folate supports cellular repair and immune function. Fiber supports digestion and helps the gut microbiome maintain function even as dietary variety shrinks. These aren't abstract nutritional benefits. In a prolonged, high-stress environment with a restricted diet, they represent the difference between a body that continues to function and one that gradually deteriorates. And lentils keep. In sealed, dry storage, they maintain both safety and nutritional value for years. They're one of the most cost-effective sources of nutrition per calorie and per unit of storage space available anywhere. The math is straightforward. The case is overwhelming. Number 4. Canned coconut milk. The way the body absorbs nutrition isn't solely determined by what you eat. It's also determined by the conditions under which digestion happens. And one of the most overlooked conditions is fat availability. Several critical vitamins, vitamins A, D, E, and K, are fat-soluble. That means they require dietary fat to be absorbed and utilized properly. In a crisis scenario where the diet has been reduced largely to grains, legumes, and dried goods, fat can become the missing variable. You might be consuming all the right micronutrients on paper, but without sufficient fat in the meal, the body processes them less efficiently. The theoretical nutritional value doesn't translate into actual biological benefit. This was experienced firsthand during an extended period of relying heavily on dried food stores. The calories were adequate, the variety was sufficient in theory, but something was missing, and it wasn't until adding a fat source to meals that the difference became tangible. Not because more food was consumed, but because what was already being eaten began to work better. Canned coconut milk provides that fat source in a shelf-stable form. It doesn't require refrigeration before opening. In sealed conditions, it maintains quality over the long term without depending on any external infrastructure. And it adds both flavor and satiety to meals that might otherwise feel incomplete. Beyond fat provision, coconut milk supports digestion and contributes medium-chain triglycerides, a fat structure the body processes with particular efficiency as a fuel source. Food gives you the raw resources. Fat helps you actually use them. And in conditions where every nutritional input needs to deliver maximum return, that efficiency is non-optional. Number 3. Dried mushrooms. There is a dimension of survival that doesn't get discussed as often as calories or protein, and it might matter more than either over the long term: the psychological dimension. Specifically, what happens to a person's will to continue when every single meal begins to feel exactly like the last one?
In the early days of a crisis, monotony is tolerable. You're running on adrenaline and immediate purpose.
But as weeks stretch on and the diet narrows and meals stop feeling like meals and start feeling like fuel management exercises, something in human motivation begins to erode. Eating becomes mechanical. The anticipation that normally accompanies mealtime disappears, and the subtle but real connection between enjoying food and maintaining psychological stability starts to fray. This isn't a minor inconvenience. Someone who spent an extended period relying on uniform dried food stores described how the sameness eventually made the act of eating feel burdensome. They had enough, but meals that felt identical day after day began to weigh on morale in ways they hadn't anticipated. The body wants to continue, but the mind needs something to look forward to. Dried mushrooms address this in a way that few other shelf-stable foods do. Rehydrated with plain water, they return to something that looks, smells, and tastes recognizably close to fresh food. They introduce texture and depth of flavor that can transform a simple grain dish into something that actually feels like a meal. They provide minerals and vitamins, particularly B vitamins and certain antioxidants that tend to decline when fresh food disappears. And they accomplish all of this without refrigeration, without electricity, and with remarkable shelf stability when kept dry and sealed. Food sustains the body. Variety sustains the will to keep eating. And in a situation where mental and emotional reserves are already under pressure, the small act of a meal that doesn't feel like a ration can do more than it has any right to. Number 2, chia seeds. When thinking about what breaks a person down in a crisis, most people think about food scarcity. But in many documented accounts of prolonged hardship, dehydration is the more immediate threat, and it's one that often operates invisibly until it has already done significant damage. Water availability becomes complicated fast when infrastructure is disrupted. Even when water is available, maintaining adequate hydration under physical and psychological stress is harder than it appears. The body loses water faster under stress. Exertion increases loss. Heat accelerates it. And in conditions where conservation is necessary, the instinct to limit water intake can create a deficit that compounds quietly day by day. Losing approximately 2% of the body's water content is enough to measurably reduce physical endurance and cognitive performance. The first signs are subtle: a persistent dryness, fatigue that arrives faster than it should, a sense of mental heaviness that makes clear thinking slightly harder. By the time thirst becomes obvious, the deficit is already established. Chia seeds have a distinctive physical property that makes them directly relevant to this problem. When mixed with water, they form a natural gel. This gel slows the absorption process, which means the body retains hydration more effectively over time, rather than processing and excreting water quickly. Someone who spent weeks conserving water described adding chia seeds to their daily routine and noticing a meaningful reduction in the persistent dryness and fatigue that had been affecting them. The water intake didn't increase dramatically, but the water they consumed began to hold longer. Beyond hydration support, chia seeds provide omega-3 fatty acids, dietary fiber, and a useful amount of protein, all in a form that stores without refrigeration for years in sealed conditions. They're versatile enough to mix into almost any meal, require no cooking, and take up minimal storage space relative to the nutritional value they contribute. The ability to retain water efficiently isn't a convenience in a prolonged crisis. It directly determines how well the body and mind continue to function when conditions work against both. Number 1, gelatin. In the early period of any sustained crisis, the body can hold together on energy and basic macronutrients. The reserves built up over a lifetime of adequate nutrition provide a buffer. But as weeks pass and the diet remains restricted, a different kind of problem begins to develop. Not a lack of fuel, but a loss of the body's capacity to repair itself. Every day under sustained physical and psychological pressure, tissues break down. Joints absorb impact, connective tissue stretches and strains, the gut lining processes whatever it's given, often under conditions it wasn't designed to handle long term. Collagen is the structural protein that supports all of these systems: joints, tendons, the gut lining, skin, and tissue interfaces throughout the body. It makes up approximately 30% of the total protein content of the human body.
And in a crisis diet, stripped of fresh animal products and bone broth, and the collagen-rich foods that modern life delivers incidentally, it stops being replenished. The signs are gradual. Joints become stiffer after physical effort. Recovery from exertion takes noticeably longer. Digestion becomes more sensitive. The body keeps operating, but it operates with increasing friction. Someone who went through an extended period of heavy physical work on restricted rations described it precisely. They had enough energy to do the work, but the soreness stopped clearing overnight the way it used to. Not from injury, from a body that no longer had the foundation to regenerate. Gelatin provides the direct building blocks of collagen in a shelf-stable, practical form. Kept sealed and dry, it stores without refrigeration for an extended period. It dissolves easily in warm liquid, adds no significant flavor to meals, and integrates without friction into almost any eating routine. And it delivers glycine, proline, and hydroxyproline, the amino acids that the body uses to maintain and rebuild collagen structure throughout the connective tissues and gut lining. Recovery is not a comfort. In a sustained survival context, recovery is the operational condition that determines whether you can continue functioning tomorrow. Energy keeps you moving today. Recovery determines whether you're capable of moving the day after. And over weeks and months of sustained pressure, the cumulative difference between a body that can repair itself and one that cannot is the difference between maintaining capacity and gradual breakdown. In every documented period of prolonged instability, it was never the staple foods that ran short first. It was always the things that keep biology stable. The minerals, the fats, the structural proteins, the micronutrients that normal life delivers without anyone having to think about them. You can survive for a few days on almost anything. You cannot maintain health, cognitive function, and physical capacity over months without the full range of what the body actually needs. These 12 foods are not chosen for convenience or trendiness. They are chosen because each one fills a specific gap that a crisis diet creates. Together, they cover the full range of what the body needs to not just endure, but to keep functioning well enough to handle whatever comes next. Preparation is not fear. It is the recognition that stability is not guaranteed, and that the difference between people who make it through prolonged disruption and those who don't is rarely dramatic. It's almost always about what they had already done before the disruption began. If this content is useful to you, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. This is my channel, and if you want to keep receiving content that actually prepares you for real conditions rather than theoretical ones, subscribing is the best way to make sure you don't miss what comes next. The world doesn't always give you a warning, but information does, and today you have